Steve Gill. Hello, sir. I'm happy to see you, although online. I hope we'll meet at our studio as well. First of all, thank you so much for your readiness to comment on the most important issue of today's news feed, which is the meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky. So first of all, what's your main impression? What have you seen? What have you heard? What do you think about the meeting itself?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I think, first of all, I think that the best news, I'm not sure when we locked out, was that President Putin and President Trump talked for over an hour, and President Trump is indicating he's talking to President Putin after the Zelensky meeting. So hopefully that means progress. But I will tell you, having been involved in negotiations in business and diplomacy in the past, the easy part is done. The hardest part of a negotiation are those last points, those last steps. That's where we are, and I think there are still some huge barriers to resolving this conflict between Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah, so maybe you can tell us about the public opinion in the U.S. Is this issue still topic number one for the United States, or has it lost its place and it's now maybe on the 10th or 15th, 20th position compared to Epstein files and, I don't know, hundreds of other issues which are in media top right now?
It is way down the list. You are exactly right. And I think one of the top points of it continue to be how many U.S. tax dollars have been spent and wasted, particularly when we get story after story of the billions of dollars in corruption of tax dollars being stolen. So I think that's the hot point still in the U.S. I think our economy and other issues like that are much higher on the list. I think the corruption issue, both here in the U.S., in some of our states, and what we see in Ukraine, is probably what mobilizes the public opinion in the U.S. right now. We're done with being involved in European conflicts. We're done with funding them. We're done with funding NATO and the EU. And I think that's all tied into watching this hopefully come to a resolution. And I think President Trump understands that the economic benefits to the U.S. and to Russia of ending this and getting back to business is going to benefit U.S. consumers and taxpayers and Russian consumers and taxpayers. And Trump is always a businessman first.
Yeah, and I also, usually I have an impression that each time Trump sees any of the leaders of the European Union, first of all, the Euro bureaucracy as a supranational body, but also some of the leaders of the European countries, he sees they're leaders of the Democratic Party of the United States. I think he sees the same kind of guys there because during the elections of Trump, they actually were pretty obviously trying to support Kamala Harris. Then they are trying to undermine and to create obstacles for Trump's politics towards Ukraine and Russian-Ukrainian conflict. First of all, in order to try to support somehow the Democratic Party, give them some time for maybe for the midterms when they might get a majority in the Congress, but also before the next election so that they have a platform which they can be based on. So this issue with Ukraine and with the European Union, as you have said, the European wars, is not only foreign policy for Donald Trump, but also I think sometimes it has to do with elections and with his opposition and with all that stuff. Would you agree with that?
Oh, President Trump definitely watches polls, both here in the United States and in Europe. And when he looks, as you say, to these European leaders, he sees them flailing in terms of their own political support in their countries. I mean, Keir Starmer in Britain, Macron in Germany, the AfD is making progress. The strongest leaders in Europe are the ones who are being more Trump-like, whether it's Meloni in Italy, whether it's Hungary and the others. The ones that Trump seems to have the most affinity with are the ones that seem to reflect the reality on the battlefield and economically in Europe. And then again, when you look at the economic disasters of France and Britain and Germany, compared to how the Russian economy has sustained despite the sanctions. Russia still has a stronger GDP than these countries that want to continue the conflict. And the U.S., of course, under Trump has had an amazing rebound economically from what we saw under President Biden. So President Trump is watching the economic numbers here and abroad. He's watching the poll numbers here and abroad. And I think that bodes well for him to continue to have a positive relationship with and positive conversation with President Putin to try and end this. Because again, President Trump is a businessman first, and he sees the huge opportunities for both Russians and Americans in ending this and getting back to business.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I would like to comment on and also discuss an issue which might be a little bit different from the main topic we have right now, but actually it is connected pretty well with Ukraine and with other post-Soviet Union countries as well. Several days ago, I've read an article, and I was really shocked. I read an article of the New York Times, which said that Trump and his administration are violating some constitutional rights of the Americans because during the Christmas, they have made some notions and declarations which are, linked too much to religious language. And I've read their Trump's address and address of Marco Rubio and the other members of his presidential staff. And the only thing they did, they have mentioned Jesus Christ. And that was considered to be a problem by the New York Times. That Christmas, which is called Christmas because of Jesus Christ, that during the address, which is because of Christmas and is dedicated to Christmas, they mentioned Jesus Christ as our Lord and Savior. And they have said that that's a violation of religious rights of Americans, etc. And in the meantime, I understand quite well that that's one of the main topics for the globalists to try to destroy Christianity and religion as well. But in the meantime, in the majority of the post-Soviet Union countries which are Christian, we can see that there are severe violations of religious rights of people because the churches there are trying to be destroyed by the local governments, which get a lot of support from the European Union. And one of the main reasons why that's done right now is, I think, one of the reports of Chatham House think tank, which I've read several years ago, where they've said that the churches, the Orthodox churches, Christian churches in those countries are the main providers of traditional values, of national values, and that's a problem for the globalists. So that's why the first thing they should do is to destroy Christianity and churches there and try to create a loyalty based on citizenship, try to create a loyalty based on nationality, but not the church and not the Christianity. And I don't know if the Americans right now, they know that and they pay attention to the fact that one of the main reasons of the conflict in Ukraine and one of the terrible things which the Ukrainian government does for the moment is the destruction of the church there. Do American people know about it? Because I know that in their majority, usually the Americans which are shown by TV are Jimmy Kimmel, not the most traditional guys. Those are not the guys we would like right here. But I know that the vast majority of Americans are conservative-minded, are very traditional, and they have a lot in common with Russian people. And that regular people are absolutely fine with the same things which we believe in. Do they know that one of the reasons of the conflict in Ukraine and in other post-Soviet Union countries where we have this conflict with their governments is that they are persecuting Christianity and church?
You are exactly right. And first of all, my friend, let me say I'm so disappointed that you're reading the New York Times. You're never going to get the truth reading the New York Times. And you're exactly right. By the way, I will do an early Christmas because I know your Christmas comes in about a week and a half. But Merry Christmas to all of my friends in Russia as well. The affinity between Russians and Americans really is deep and strong if we will get back to people and people communicating. Americans, as you point out, have that fundamental Christian viewpoint that is shared by our friends and families in Russia. And they have been seeking to destroy that religious faith, the saying Merry Christmas here in the U.S. for a long time as well. And President Trump has pushed back against that. One of the great news pieces that came out this week that probably won't be reported in the New York Times is that the Gen Z, the younger generation of Americans, are flooding back into the churches. The fastest growing religious faith, Christian religious faith in America is coming from those young people. And I think that is a bright spot for us. And I think, again, it should give folks in Russia a look at America and feel like we're getting back on the right track. And you're right, this really does tie to the Ukraine-Russia conflict. We're told by our mainstream legacy left-wing woke media that Ukraine is a democracy we must defend. And yet Zelensky has banned opposition political parties, banned independent journalism, gone after the Orthodox Church, and refused to have elections. None of that is democratic. But as you point out, the worst is going after the churches. And I think that's where they're losing not only their people, but losing the faithful around the world. And again, in the U.S., we're back to saying Merry Christmas. You never stopped. And again, I think that's one of the reasons that I find that when Russians and American people talk, we do much better than we do when our governments are talking.
Yeah, sure. Although even with the governments, it's the first time in the last years that we have a dialogue and we have an impression that they understand each other quite well. Although we can see that Donald Trump has to work with different groups of interest in his government, to work with his opposition, with media, which is quite difficult for him, and that's quite obvious for us. So you think that the negotiations, because the president of the U.S. has just said that either we are going to get a deal right here, right now, or it's going to be a long conflict and it's going to take a very long time. You think it's possible that it's going to end in the coming days and they will be able to reach an agreement, or it's going to be the second scenario?
I am hopeful that they can move forward relatively quickly, but the impasse now is a couple of things that I've been talking about for quite some time. One, who do the Russians negotiate with? Zelensky has overstayed his power, is refusing to have elections, is claiming that under their constitution they have to have elections in order to cede territory in the Donbass, for example. So he's continuing to throw up barriers and obstruction to getting to a deal. Second, Zelensky continues, as do the European bureaucrats or corruptocrats, to demand that NATO be expanded into Ukraine. We have long had an agreement that would not happen. That is a bright line not going to happen. And yet Zelensky and the Europeans who want to continue the war continue to demand, or at least say that, well, we'll go into a timeout, and then we're going to come back later and try to add Ukraine to NATO. I don't think Russia, I don't think the U.S., I don't think anybody reasonable wants to have a timeout. If it's going to be resolved, let's resolve it and not just push conflict to where Ukraine can rearm and remobilize. And I think the biggest issue to me still remaining is what happens to Odessa. Odessa was Russian under the Soviet Union. It was allowed to be part of Ukraine when Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. But to me, the biggest geographic barrier to peace now that's not getting enough attention is what happens to Odessa. It is Russian. In my view, it should be Russian. And if that gets left for later discussion, we're just delaying an inevitable conflict over Odessa at some point in the future if everything doesn't get resolved now. So I am hopeful that they are getting closer. Negotiations always go better when people are talking than when they're not. And as you pointed out, we went through a period of time under the Biden administration where there was very little conversation between the U.S. and Russia, certainly not much that was productive. So the fact that, again, President Putin and President Trump are talking at length, have a great rapport, a great relationship, I think bodes well. But the barrier to peace remains NATO, the European Union, and the corruptocrats there, and President Zelensky, who is refusing to recognize the reality on the battlefield, much less the reality of U.S. support at this time. I did want to make one final point. I was in Russia a couple of times the last couple of years, and I expected that there would be some pushback against an American because we have been supplying bombs and missiles and weapons that have killed young men from Russia. And yet the people in Russia could not have been kinder, gentler, nicer to me during my visits on business there. And I think, again, when we as people get together, we do pretty well. I had many people in Russia saying, look, we like America. We just don't like your government. And I would have to say, I agree. I don't always like my government either.
Well, let's hope that there is one point where our foreign policy strategies are pretty in common, and they share that point as well, is that in your new strategy of national security, it is said that the European Union persecutes democracy and popular parties, and that the European Union is a threat towards democracy. So we don't like the European Union either. So let's hope that maybe we can come together in our attempts to destroy that satanistic union, which is persecuting Christians, which is destroying traditional values, traditional families, and which is responsible for what's happening right here, right now. And I'm sure that regular people will always find the common ground and a way for a dialogue. Thank you so much, sir, and I hope that next time we'll meet in Moscow at our studio.
I look forward to being in studio next time.
Thank you. Hope so.